Hello, and welcome back to Valerie's Creeping Corner. Today, the story I will be talking about is that of food. I do hope you enjoy food, as I do. As usual, I will ask that you listen to this with headphones on in the quiet and dark of your room. And should you need to turn on the light, please do so. I heard there's ghosts in your room. I know there are some in mine. I'm joking. The story I'll be reading to you today is called The Reviewer. And I like it. The incident that led up to me writing in this journal is one that I know deep down will never disappear. It will live on in me forever, of that I am sure. That's why I had to recently check myself into the psychiatric facility for worry of how I could get through the days ahead. Before I found myself here in this hospital room writing on this ridiculously uncomfortable excuse of a bed, I used to do much of the same. I wrote articles for an online travel website that focused on the best places for tourists to visit in different cities. More specifically, I wrote the food articles. And because of that, I found myself waiting in a 2-hour-long line to enter Duncan's Bistro. Duncan's had always been a staple to the small town of Benthel here in Virginia. From what I had researched, Richard Duncan's, the owner, had lost his parents at a young age and jumped from different relatives until he was old enough to attend college. He studied culinary arts in New York in order to honor his parents, who had also owned a restaurant in Benthel. In fact, they had owned the exact restaurant where Duncan's Bistro stood now. Duncan had taken out a small loan after graduating college. That, mixed with the money his parents had left him behind, allowed him to buy back the abandoned building and turn it into what it is today. Duncan's Bistro quickly grew in popularity and buzz as Duncan found himself engaged with the daughter of local news reporter Tom Davings. Davings was a bit of a celebrity in Benthel, which allowed the bistro a lot of free publicity in its early days. That, mixed with the fact that Duncan had an amazing skill, allowed the bistro to do remarkably well for a business in this small town. Today, though, was a different day for reportings, as Duncan was adding a new, limited-time-only item to his menu. Duncan never changed the menu. This was big news for people traveling along the side of the East Coast, and my boss had me make the 5-hour commute from Philly just to report on it. The smell outside the bistro was different from that I was used to smelling at other restaurants I'd reported at. It was off. It definitely smelled like burning meat, but something about the smell seemed different, almost more bright. And clearly it must have been amazing, as I saw the faces of the people eating looking satisfied in a way I'd rarely seen in other dining rooms. Finally, it was my turn to enter. I could feel my stomach growling as the smell of the dish filled the air. I looked around at the other tables surrounding me. The dish looked absolutely beautiful. A small bowl of a beautiful noodle stew with 2 thin slabs of what looked like beef sitting directly on top. It looked delectable. It presented itself similarly to a Japanese ramen, as its ingredients sat separated in the top of the dish, but smelled pleasantly similar to that of a French onion soup. Finally, the waiter brought me my bowl, and I could feel my mouth salivating as the aroma dispersed from under the lid and through my nostrils. I had never wanted to take a bite of anything more in my life. I grabbed my spoon, combining the ingredients to get the most perfect first bite. I must have been so entranced with food I had hardly noticed the officers that passed around me barging into the kitchen. It wasn't until I heard the slam of pots and pans crash into the ground that I turned around. An officer came out yelling at each of us to put down our foods and step away from our plates. I felt disoriented as I held my spoon over my plate. I hadn't taken a bite of it yet, and it was still the only thing I wanted in that moment, despite the officers in the dining hall. I turned around quickly back to my plate to sneak a bite, but an officer was already standing over my table, pushing away my bowl and taking my spoon from my hand. I watched the contents of the spoon splash back into the soup. A small slice of meat rising once again to the surface, coated in a light caramel glaze from the soup. The officers directed us away from the table, towards the back of the restaurant, as they searched the premises. Eventually, we were brought in one by one to speak about the incident. Apparently, Duncan's fiancée had called off the engagement only 3 days prior to the release of the new limited edition menu item. She'd also been missing for what was now 72 hours. Apparently, her clothes had been spotted in the dumpster in the alleyway behind Duncan's bistro, and it would seem that an investigation would be conducted on Richard Duncan. Inevitably, they would discover that Richard Duncan had murdered his fiancée and used the butchering station in his bistro to help dispose of her. Unfortunately, it would seem she was the limited edition item. That slab of meat that smelled so different and yet so wonderful. That piece of meat that I cannot get out of my mind. The one that I had wished I had moved just a little faster to take a bite of.